Isn't this a nice thing? We got all of these young professionals together, and we're going to try to jack them up with some energy and give them some opportunities for collaboration and engagement and problem solving and career development and success launching and all of that to help rural communities. Now, there are people looking in from the outside saying, well, ain't that nice? Gosh, I hope they do good and you know, help us get back to the 1950s. Let me tell you, do you think that it is a viable strategy to just let it go and let them continue to accumulate in our already overcrowded, overcrammed urban areas in places where you have to build a 3-story outhouse in order to have all the people there? That doesn't make sense. So I'm telling you that your work, your fundamental understanding on the ground of how to build a strong, smaller community where people can actually live and engage, live productively, is critical, I believe, to our continuation as a species on this planet. So when we talk about building vibrant rural communities, I will tell you that I believe it is certainly a critical factor in the success of states like Nebraska, states across the High Plains, but also across the country and around the world. So what's vibrant really mean? Let's be clear. It begins with an active business sector. There's been too much conversation over decades about rural development being, well, we're going to develop community structures and we're going to develop a nice place to live and all of those things are fine. The truth is we have to have genuine economic activity generated in our rural communities in order for them to be successful. Poor people don't build better schools, better roads, better hospitals, provide access to the humanities. There has to be genuine business activity. Has to be genuine education opportunities. Folks like you, as much as you love a smaller community and may make a choice to be there for every good reason, are not stupid. You're not willing to volunteer for poverty, volunteer to disadvantage your children educationally. You're not going to put them in a situation where they don't have access to quality health care. Those things are critically important to vibrant rural communities. And by the way, there also need to be decent entertainment option and as important as any of them, opportunities, and we hear this all the time from young professional families that are choosing to live in smaller communities. They want to live in a place where their values, their engagement, their energy, their vision makes a difference. So that's what vibrant in our realm really means. Okay, so want to build strong rural communities. What the heck is rural? How do you guys define rural? I rarely go a week without some big feeling smart guy saying, well, so how do you define rural? What's the line? What's the line? Where's Tiffany Krause? Tiffany, you remember when we were walking up and down the streets in Hastings and we went into the insurance agency and I said, I'm here from the Rural Futures Institute, and the guy says, Rural Futures? Well, this is Hastings. Seriously? Folks, how about if we agree that's a silly argument for us, okay? Nebraska as a state has a population of 1.8 million people. There are over 150 cities on this planet with populations of more than 3 million. Look at this list. You could put 20 Nebraskas in the city of Tokyo, Jakarta, Seoul. I'm sorry, we are all rural in this part of the world and need to accept that we're in this together. We need to accept that we're in this together. Think about the states, my adopted home state of Oklahoma. Big state, 3.9 million. Kansas, 2.9. Nebraska, 1.8. Our folks in South Dakota, 860,000. North Dakota, 670. Wyoming, not even as big as Omaha. Come on. We are all rural here. When you look at a couple of states where I've spent some time traveling, would be Nebraska, South Dakota over the last year or so. 94% of our towns and villages in Nebraska under 5,000 people, which is a line that some people draw around rural. It's silly and it's arbitrary. In Nebraska and South Dakota, 80% of our communities have fewer than 1,000 people. But it is our culture, and by the way, it is not without opportunity. Now, when you talk about states like ours and this region, believe me, there are people with letters behind their names on both coasts and in big institutions who say, well, those poor people, they don't understand that, small towns really have no future. A community's location is key to its survival. If it's more than 30 miles from an interstate, can't make it, don't you know? The only way for any of these small communities to make it is if they go and recruit a big manufacturer, a big hiring agent, if you will, to come to their community. Never mind small businesses that are built there. Small towns can't compete in the global economy. The really good people, the smart people, they move away right away. Don't you know that? Rural and urban economies are not interdependent. Try to sell that to Governor Ricketts right now. Try to sell that. I'm sorry, it's just not true. So, 1986. How many people were even alive in 1986 in this room? Well, a few, okay, all right, good deal. Well, here's the deal. Okay, we're in the middle in Nebraska, in this part of the country. We're in the midst of the ag crisis, okay? Most difficult economic conditions since the Great Depression. Communities were having significant difficulties. Banks were failing. Businesses were failing. And so, again, we had guys in big institutions doing big studies and coming out and saying, well, now, if you have a population under 1,000 people, you're more than 30 miles from an interstate, you have a fundamentally ag-based economy, you can't make it. We've looked at all the numbers, you can't make it. Well, there was a group of us, small group of us here in Nebraska who said, we think that's a lot of baloney. That isn't exactly what we said, but for today's audience, we'll say it was a lot of baloney. We were looking at rural communities in our region that were surviving in those times and arguably thriving, and we said maybe somebody ought to go look at why those communities are succeeding rather than studying all the communities that are failing. So we did this little study that resulted in the 20 clues to rural community survival. And you'll see up on the screens some of the things that came out of those 20 clues. Evidence of community pride, an emphasis on quality in business and community life, a realistic appraisal of our opportunities. One, again, Tiffany, not unlike we heard in Hastings when Randy Chick said, we figured out the cavalry ain't coming. We're going to have to do it ourselves. All of those things we found in that study, but you know what? You can take away the other 19 clues. And here was the fundamental observation. It is leadership in a community. Is people in a community taking responsibility for making things happen that determined whether or not that community was going to survive and make it through the most difficult era since the Great Depression. Well, if you'd like a little more current data, Dr. Lindsay Hastings at the University of Nebraska, who heads the Nebraska Human Resources Institute, as part of her PhD research, looked at transitions of leadership in some successful rural communities and came up with 6 characteristics that describe a successful rural community in today's environment. Number 1, leadership that matters, not just leadership that takes on the title, not the 4 oldest, fattest guys in town still making all the decisions. It is leadership that has vision, leadership that is inclusive. It's because number 2 is communities where there is a deliberate effort to invite people into leadership roles, inviting them into that engagement, that ownership of driving change in the community. Third, a willingness to invest in the community. Communities where all the local savings and retirement accounts and such are not going to Wall Street, but instead are investing back in local businesses. We saw such powerful examples of this in West Point with our Rural Regional Forum here just a few weeks ago. There are communities out there, and Carl with the Nebraska Community Foundation, you folks have made a tremendous difference in giving people an opportunity to invest back in their community in a way that's wise. So communities that are making it, that are successful, take advantage of that. Fear is not a barrier to taking steps toward a desired future. Folks are willing to sit down and say, this may or may not work, we're going to try something. We're not going to just sit and let fate drop its heavy butt on us. We are going to take steps in the direction we want to go. It might work, it might not, but you know what? I'll bet we'll survive. Strong social networks, communities where people get together. Where people get together. West Point, I've been so impressed with the group of business people that their bottom line breakfasts, they get together periodically to talk about what are the needs of our community, what we might do together, face to face, in order to build a strong community. And finally, a hopeful vision backed by grit. When we talk to communities, and when we go to communities like West Point, North Platte, Neely, we just had a good conversation about that, Ord, Chadron. Yeah, they've got stuff going on. They've got some very positive things. And by the way, I can give you a list of 30. But they've got some positive things going on. Do you think it's all people just getting together to sing Kumbaya down at the community park? No. No. Again, Hastings, that has had such a phenomenal renaissance, particularly in their downtown. And I asked one of the founders of that success, I said, so how'd that happen? He said 5-4 votes. 5-4 votes over and over and over. Yeah, we had a vision, but it required grit. So our objective, so you understand, and many of you that have worked with us over the last few years, we haven't been around that long, know several to it, know this is true. But our objective is to support local leaders like you who have a vision for a community that is strong and vital economically, socially, culturally, environmentally. Communities that provide a legitimate best choice for young families that are looking for a place to launch careers, build businesses, build their families, be actively involved in an environment where they can make a difference. That is what we're all about and what you're a part of here. I was so encouraged and emboldened by our pre-conference survey where we asked the question about your engagement in leadership. And 95% of you express a hopeful outlook on your future. And so many of you, well over 50%, involved in multiple leadership roles in your community. Well, the truth is, obviously in the end, we want your community to be a hopeful place. What we need to understand is that hope, based upon the good science of Dr. Shane Lopez, hope is a choice. It's not a fairy dust deal. It is not a tap with the wand. It is a choice. We can choose actions that will lead us toward our goals. Rural community difference makers like you demonstrate, and we just see this over and over and over again. Again, through our rural forums where we have a chance to come into a community and really take a deep dive in getting to know the people there as well as what they're doing. And we find so many of those examples of leaders who have made the choice to move in a hopeful direction for their community. What we also know from Dr. Lopez's research is that hope can be learned. Hope can be learned. It's not something you're born with. It's not something that rains down on you. There are steps that can be learned, and by the way, in the end, hope can be shared. Melissa Garcia, I love telling the story of Broken Bow. And I come back after 20 years and remember how far down Broken Bow had gone through that ag crisis, and here's a great, great, great Nebraska community. And when I ask you, when I came back and I see this phenomenal renaissance, and I said, how'd this happen? And you said, small group of people. sitting around a table and saying, we're not okay with where we are. We know we'd like to be better. We know where we'd like to go. We don't know exactly how to get there. We're going to take some steps in that direction. And that small group grew to a larger group, to a larger group, to a larger group, to today one of the most dynamic rural communities in Nebraska, and I would argue a national model. I'm just going to ask you, as leaders in this room today, to choose to be a change maker. Don't let those folks far away from you doing various calculus around rural stuff and trying to tell you how it can't happen and it's all the action's going to be in the cities. It's baloney. You can choose your future. So I just thank you once again for coming and being a part of this gathering of such important, visionary, energetic folks, and would hope that you will choose to be a change maker. Thank you very much.